All right, so welcome to today is March 15th, and this is the Finance and Legal Guild for the Lifeboat Academy. And we have a number of regrets, is the way they say that here. We have a number of regrets of people who couldn't be here today, so we're definitely recording so that people can catch up. And not only so we have some people who can't be here, some people who can only be here late, some people who need to leave early. And so situation normal. And we have been adopting in the other guilds a general pattern of starting in a good way. So starting with a land acknowledgement and a grounding and a check-in. And so I'm going to propose that we do that as well. And as always, I make the space for anybody who would like to do the land acknowledgement and grounding, but I'm more than happy to do it.
I think I'm warming up to trying it, but I'm not quite there yet.
Cool. Um, that actually might be an interesting sidebar conversation is getting people comfortable with doing land acknowledgements and what the components are. Um, my understanding of land acknowledgements is it's most important for them to come from the heart, um, and uh, and that they offer us a chance at. We say we put the land first. We center the land in everything that we do at the Lifeboat Academy, and so by starting with a land acknowledgement, that's what we're trying to do is put the land at the center of everything that we're doing. And that is more than a lines on a map. That is actually putting an understanding of our connection and our interdependence with all of our relations, all living creatures, all entities of every sort, and decentering the ego and decentering our particular narratives of how the world is supposed to look, and instead engaging in the ongoing conversation and co-creation that is represented in the land and all our relations. And in doing so, that brings up a recognition that this is indigenous wisdom that has been um, discovered and adhered to on every continent where people have made their homes, and is something that we settler types have lost along the way. And in losing it, we also have done great harm. We've done great harm to the indigenous cultures through colonization. We've done great harm to the land through extraction and abuse. And we've done great harm to ourselves by separating ourselves from the web of all being and ourselves from ourselves. So when we center the land, when we start with a land acknowledgement, we are making a commitment to right any harms that have happened, to try to figure out how we can be good neighbors and how we can be good relations, and how we can work to decolonize ourselves, and find that place where we can uh, once again join into the community of all our relations. So with that, I nod specifically to the Wasanic, who are the traditional stewards of the land on which I find myself as an uninvited guest, and where I hope to put down deep roots and form strong bonds with all my relations, including the Wasanic and all of my non-human relations as well. So with that, let's go around and do a check-in. And the circle as I see it is Becca, Roland, and me. And I am proposing, since it is quite springy here and there are little green buds popping up all over the place. So the check-in question is, what is budding with you? So over to you, Becca. What's budding today?
Well, it's spring like here in Ho Chunk territory, Madison also, and what's budding in me? I'm hoping to be able to manifest a new capacity to dance with busyness and not have it be necessarily have to be stressful. Because there's so much of not enough and too much, and trying to find this is what's happening now is I have all these commitments that I have made, joyfully made, and so can I dance with them? Yeah, lots of new relationships, new teams here in my life. Over to Roland.
I think an apt analogy is my my plants, which have traveled with me to a number of different properties, and I have some concerns for some of them this winter when we got the cold snap, because I did not bring them in. It didn't even occur to me when I have done that umpteen times in the last few years. Some of them are not budding yet. And so I am observing them to see if it is just that it's still too early for some of them to bud, or if I have lost them. And I feel like that is an apt analogy for life. I'm not going to say my life, but I'm just going to say in general life. So over to Ben.
Yeah, Becca, once again, I feel like you and I have that connection thing. And because what's really budding for me right now is I'm becoming more and more aware of how I tense different parts of my body without even thinking about it. And the sort of cumulative effect over the course of the day where, I start off pretty fluid and by the end I am just and so I'm trying, what's budding for me is to try to be more mindful of why am I clenching my fist? Why am I lifting my shoulders? Why, and trying to yeah, and because it's usually in response to something's being asked of me, or something's going on, and instead how can I relax? And it's the same thing. Usually the things that seem to be producing it are not really stressful in themselves. There's just something I'm overlaying onto it. So yeah, that's my new experiment, is just to try to be like, oh, relax the hand, relax the shoulders. So the other thing that we do as a standard practice is to make sure that we co-create the agenda. And right now we do have one outstanding item that is from our last meeting, which is talking through some agreements, some general agreements, some guidelines really about how we want to set up the legal structure so that as we talk to the lawyers, we know that we're on the same page, and recognizing that the reason we were talking to the lawyers is that they know stuff that we don't. Also, I think it becomes a good foundation to reach out to have this conversation with Steph and also with Joey, and to make sure that we're all on the same page. And so that's on the agenda. There's also one undone item from last time, which was on me. So I guess I'm putting it out there early, which is I have not updated the driver statement. We talked about making some little changes about putting the history in there and links to the documents so that it was better as a welcoming document. I haven't done that yet. So that's still on the to-do list, but there's nothing to really talk about there. So so we've got the one item on the list, which is to talk through those agreements, and then is there anything else that we need to talk about today or that's on the radar for you, Becca?
Just I think figuring out whether we're ready to try to schedule with the lawyers after that or not.
Ron?
The I would like to leave early because there are things that I have been putting off that need attending to. So I'm going to play it by ear. If I feel like I can leave early, I will, and if I feel like I I want to stay, then I will. So at some point, I may say, okay, I think I can go now, and I will leave. And if I don't say that, it's because I feel like I want to stay. Over to Ben.
Cool. And that actually feels, I feel like we can probably get through this quickly. Where we are in terms of you know, going through the comments and the questions. I'm gonna also put the link to the document in the chat. Why? Oh, there we go. So everyone can have direct access. I feel like I'm in terms of process, we're still we have people who can't be here today. We also have an ongoing conversation that's been happening through the comments. And so I think that Becca's question of are we ready to move forward is a good question to put out to the group as a follow-up. I think we can go through and see whether or not we can resolve the comments. If that feels, if it feels like we have resolution on the comments, and then basically put out to the group, are we good to move forward? And so given that, I think we should be able to move through this fairly quickly. And I'm open to suggestions about how to do it. I think it might be easiest to just go through comment by comment. I don't know why I can't see the top of the comments here. There we go. Yeah, I'm going to propose that we just kind of go through the comments one at a time and then see whether or not they feel resolved, because then we can actually use the software itself to kind of do that. And then if anything comes up, that sounds good. I get a thumbs up from Becca and Lon. Good. Okay, cool. Well, and the first one is just, I think we can resolve that. Becca?
I think the question, the process question that Barbara's comment raises for me is, yes, each one's worthy of a conversation. And when, you know, do we need to have any more conversation? Which ones do we need to have any conversations about before we talk to the lawyers, with the lawyers, and who else besides this committee might need to be, you know, might we need to test for their comfort with?
Roland?
And I think that's a really good point. What are we okay with before talking? At one point, are we okay to bring what we have to the lawyers? So do we need to, again, have a conversation about all of these points, or are these points good enough to start a conversation that includes the lawyers?
Mm-hmm.
And actually maybe even talking through what does that look like? The conversation once the lawyers are involved, then is it, you know, is it, is this time, part of this time is reporting what the conversation with the lawyers is it, you know, like what does it look like for the guild and for the guild meetings?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have talked about, I have taken it as an agreement that we talked earlier about inviting as many people from this guild as can and are interested in attending to that meeting with the lawyers, to talk through basically these are, these are our preferences, and then so we're all going to be in on the conversation. And likewise, transparency is one of our principles. So will anybody affected by it as we move forward with the decisions, anybody affected by it will have some say in shaping it. And I think that that's actually, it gives us a fairly detailed way of working through. I think we can resolve things that we think we're good. It's always an open-ended thing. So when we send it out, if people want to reopen something, that's completely kosher. And so we can just go through and say this feels good enough for now. And I think that's really the good enough for now, safe enough to move forward to the conversation with the lawyers. And where it feels like there isn't resolution, then that we bring to the group. So, and I think that's, I'm going to propose then that this is a way of saying that's what we're going to do comment by comment as we go through. So this is itself is resolved.
And can you, by any chance, make your screen share slightly larger?
I can, but I'll have to stop sharing and then come back to it.
I forgot to bring my computer glasses to this building that I'm in. This is part of our common house at our co-housing.
I was wondering. It was a new space to me. What I don't know. No. Sorry for this. I'm trying to, the comments don't show up. Okay, this is as good as I can get. Let's see if this works.
And a bit bigger, probably. I could also just do the link instead if that. Oh, that's good.
Okay, cool.
I mean, the text is bigger, the comments aren't bigger, but.
Yeah, there's a limit to what I can do. All right, and I'm also trying to figure out where to put the video so that it's not in the way. All right, so next up is Barbara had a suggestion that we want to make sure that the sociocratic approach includes any investor agreements and MOUs or other legal documents. I think that's a good point, and at this point, it's also not directly relevant to getting the structure in place. It's probably something that will come out as talking to the lawyers about what those additional agreements are. At least that's, and I guess let's just do, a quicker round for each of these. So that was my feeling was right now, I wanted to stay as focused as we could on establishing the legal entity. And, but I think the spirit of the comment is, yes, definitely. We want to make sure that this way of working is reflected in all of our agreements. Over to you, Becca.
Yeah, is there a place you want to capture that in a to-do list elsewhere, or is it already kind of on the plan, in the plans?
I think we can actually, maybe we should just add it in here because this is kind of our to-do list for the lawyers, and it would be something for the lawyers. So maybe we just, where does that go? I think that's actually implied in here. I think we can just make it more explicit.
We could just leave the comment as a, well, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to resolve it so that, I think we can just make it explicit.
Okay.
Anyhow, sorry, I'm breaking circle.
Hold on.
Yep, that's good with me, and I like that you kept it general to all legal agreements because there's more than the investor agreements, and so yep, and it is our bringing our working process forward and making the lawyers aware of how we're working again. And so repetition is always good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, resolved. The next set of comments are about do we want to have an investor circle or will they be invited into existing circles? Roland saying basically we should bring them into existing circles. And there was a question then from Barbara about peer as a function in sociocracy. And I actually wanted to apologize. I made all of my comments under the Friends of the Lifeboat Academy just because that was the screen I was working on, and I should have done it as me, not as the Friends. But anyhow, so this is my comment at the end. And my comment is basically peer is not a sociocracy concept. It's something that we've added that's more about the farm and trying to make sure that people are up to speed on chores and practical skills on the farm. So but what I'm taking from this is an agreement that we won't have a separate investor circle, but that they would actually be included in the regular operations. That makes most sense to me too, because we don't want to create an artificial distinction between people who have financial investments and people who are invested with other capital. And I think that in some ways, I think we should be thinking about everyone's in it. Everyone who's involved is an investor. They're either investing skills, labor, capital, whatever. So at this point, it sounds like we're, I guess it seems like the proposal is we do not want a separate investor circle. And I'm good with that. And Becca, over to you.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. And also, there's nothing to stop us from adding one later if we decide we want one. It's not really a legal structure question, I don't think.
Yeah.
Over to you, Roland.
Yep, agreed. Yep, agreed. We can add one later if we feel like it makes sense. And right now for me, like I wrote, it feels like it would create division.
Mm-hmm.
What is the risk of it creating division because of different types of anyway, that it would be sliding back into old neural pathways that we are actively trying to change. I'll say it that way.
Yeah. Well, cool. Then that's resolved. And actually, even if we had a separate investor circle, sociocratic rules would still apply, which means that circle wouldn't have any, it couldn't make any choice that people would always, anybody affected by their decisions would have the ability to object to those decisions if they weren't, function effective. All right, next one is around the experiment idea, and Roland making a suggestion that we define or explain what experiments are, in part because we have had lots of conversations about what is an experiment. And I've answered this in terms of, since this is really only an internal document, we don't mention experiment anywhere in the legal form. And so we don't really need to define it for the legal structure. Moving forward, I think it's probably, we've talked about as part of our onboarding, including what is an experiment. What do we mean when we say an experiment? And I think that definitely is true, but for the legal structure, it doesn't, I'm not sure where it would fit in the legal structure. Becca, over to you.
I don't have anything to add. Pass.
Berlin?
Okay, so just putting in experimental period is not a reference um, to the reporting on experiments that we had talked about as a form of how to report back to investors on social investment. So this is sort of like a separate. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
I think what you're referring to is there's an annual social benefits report, and that is part of the legal structure. But or it is definitely part of the legal structure if we're a B Corp or a CCC. It has to be part of those legal forms, and we have incorporated it into our legal form that we provide a report on social benefits every year to everybody.
and this is a good opportunity for me to remember that this is actually good enough to be able to show the lawyers. And if they have questions about this wording, then we will have already had a discussion about our intention behind it to be able to talk it through. And if they don't have any questions about it, then we let it go. So I'm good.
Yeah,
It
it's
could just
probably good.
could just as easily be called the initial 10-year startup phase or something, like
Mhm.
as long as in the next bullet point says the goal of what's in the quotes, um, kind of defines it, doesn't it?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And it's probably most relevant to whatever agreements we have with social mortgage holders. Like that's where it becomes relevant in whatever the legal document is that establishes that social mortgage. That's where that language needs to be clear. And it really is, like Becca was saying, it's the initial 10-year period, whatever we want to call that. All right, so we're going to consider that resolved. Okay, that's just a emphasis agreement. And this one, the next comment is about, I put this in about we could pay there's a question about limits, or there's an option in the legal structure to limit the size or nature of dividends that are paid to investors. And you can cap it at a certain percentage of profit, or at a certain amount. And just I had been thinking no financial dividends to investors, but we could leave it more open-ended. And I just put in something in there about in thinking about making sure that investors don't have aren't damaged, that they're made financially whole. If there were expenses, like year-to-year expenses that they had, that could be a reasonable dividend to pay, that would just be, basically kind of carrying costs. And then Heather made the comment that this could be really complicated to figure out how to do. How do we know what their costs are and that sort of thing. So this maybe is something that requires more conversation. I originally put it in there just as I randomly added it in on the fly. And I'm not invested in it or anything like that. And I don't know whether we want to resolve it or leave it open for more conversation. Becca, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think leaving it open might make sense. It brings up for me my age-old question about interest on loans, which I know you say somewhere here, social mortgage holders are shareholders, not loans. So this is a different category, but I think we need professional advice about this stuff, and when it gets to this point. So I think it's good to leave it in. And I'm not sure if the lawyers will have all the answers, and if we have to, get some answers from accountants also, but
Oh, and there's Heather. Hello, Heather. Welcome.
Hello. I thought maybe they've stopped meeting by now.
Not yet. So what we're doing is we're just going through the proposed agreement, the structural elements, and we're going through and resolving the comments that we think we can resolve. And we're trying to get to the place where we feel good moving forward to talk to the lawyers. So it's good enough for now, safe enough to talk to the lawyers about is our standard for agreement. And we're just going through the comments and seeing whether or not we can resolve them or leave them open for further conversation. And we were just up to the idea of possibly paying dividends to investors to cover whatever out-of-pocket expenses they might have in investing in the project. And your question or comment about that could get complicated. And Becca had just said, and we were, I think where we are is we're thinking we'll leave it in there with a recognition that we need some professional advice on this. This is maybe the lawyers will have an answer to that. And so it's kind of in there almost, I'm going to say it's almost like on the wish list. Maybe not a central thing, but if it's in the spirit of making sure investors aren't taking a hit by supporting us.
Yeah,
You know.
and it's just to be something like to be negotiated or whatever terms to be negotiated.
Mhm.
Just that I know that I, who live on almost nothing, am sometimes shocked at how people who have a lot of money just assume that they can spend a lot of money, or what is necessary to them to do is really different than me. And I'm just saying that it's different for everybody. So we might be shocked by how much out-of-pocket expense they feel is totally legit.
Well, and how we account for that. And we're doing, we're also doing a circle. So, and I
Okay.
will slot you in. The way I see it now is, I guess I'll put you in between Becca and, actually, no, I'll put you after Roland. So the circle will be Becca, Roland, Heather, Ben.
Okay.
And so Becca, did you have anything else to add, or do you want to pass over to Roland?
Pastor along.
I think that this is another really good reminder, or that I think our conversation around this is changing, because we're going to be talking to lawyers, peers, not peers. I'm not a peer for a lawyer. What would I call that? Anyway, someone with different knowledge, someone that we're consulting. So we've been having conversations about, does this make sense? Does this feel fair? Does this seem right? And I think now when I'm looking at things, I'm looking at it differently as, is this good enough for now? And is this something that I need someone with more expertise to talk it through with? So for me, this seems like a good addition. It feels like it is fair, and I actually really like what you added, Heather, in terms of be also being able to respect that other people have a different relationship to money and the current economic system, and how can we respect it, as in how can we see that and be able to respond to it so that we're also respected, so that everyone is respected, I should say. So over to you, Heather.
Yeah, I think that I kind of made my point is when I thought about the out-of-pocket expenses. I even know within my small circle, people expect to go to a hotel. And I negotiate to be billeted, you know, just on the very simple kind of variance.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Over to me.
Yep. Sorry. I'm finished.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's key here that the out-of-pocket expenses would be specifically due to taxes or reporting. That too can get kind of nebulous. But it would be sort of direct because of the investment. These are the requirements. So anyhow, I'm going to resolve the comment but then I've added a specific question into that bullet point to sort of highlight that. All right, the next comment is the pulling the plug, that basically the whole idea of the 10-year experiment or initial period, whatever we might call it, is to make sure that people can't pull the plug on the project before it's time. And there's a question about how that might be enforced. And that is, it's a really good question. And I think that's also definitely something we want to make sure with the lawyers get their read on it. I provided my answer, which is that, basically the way I'm envisioning this, the mortgage holders are not offering a loan. They are actually buying shares. So they are invested and shareholders. And I know that there are a number of restrictions that are possible to put into the articles based on for investors. One is simply that initial investors can't take their investment out before a certain period. I've seen that in other agreements. And so that would definitely be one of those. And I think that what we're saying here too is this is again for the conversation with the lawyers. Our goal is we don't want investors to be able to undermine the project. We talk to the lawyers and say, how do we do that? And I think this is for me, let them figure that out. So over to Becca. Thoughts or ideas?
No, I think this is really a super important crux issue that we need advice about. So I think I feel like the main thing is for us to be on the same page going into the conversation with the lawyers as much as possible, so we're not, having a tug of war. And I think that this interacts with the one later about selling the land in a way that when I got to that point, when I was reading it the other day, I was like, yeah, I'm confused about how to make this workable in a way that doesn't cause the investors to risk losing their investment, which we also say somewhere we don't want. So, but I think it's fine to leave this as is and address that as if there are contradictions, address it as we get to those. Over to Roland.
Actually, I had a question. Do we have the lawyers on retainer for more than the legal structure? Because we're starting to link into things like the social mortgage agreement, and yeah. So I guess that's my question. And if we do, yeah. I guess it's okay if we talk about how it links in with the social mortgage agreement, even though the lawyers aren't on retainer for that part. But I'm wondering if that might also cause a difficulty if they're not. Anyway, that's all I'd have to say. or that I guess that's my question.
Becca, looks like you want to add to that?
I think we do. I could pull it up, but my memory is that it says incorporation and associated consulting or something pretty vague like that. So I think it's a question of, you know, how much is it going to cost? But I think I think there's room to ask them these questions.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Over to Heather.
Yeah, I know that cooperatives protect themselves by in a couple of ways. One is to be assured that there's a limited number of shares you can have that don't put the cooperative in jeopardy. There is, if you want to pull out your shares, that there is a certain timeline that you have for, you know, advance notice. That there is other ways to invest besides shares that have a different agreement to it, like shareholder loans and things like that. And that there is some clause in the Constitution to say you can't put the co-op in jeopardy. So I don't know, like in the B Corp, but I mean, I'm sure the lawyers will have all of that language, you
Mhm.
know, to assure that there isn't one person that can just pull the plug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's it. That I imagine there are lots of tools in their toolkit. And in terms of the retainer, you know, I would say the lawyers, it's the question is how much might it cost and can we cover the cost of it? They're not going to say no, no, I won't take that on if it's going to be within what they can do and they're going to be willing to do it as long as we're willing to pay for it.
And also to have whatever in our Constitution, to have it pretty, you know, the wording
Yeah.
to be such that people who are investing understand that they can't do this.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's
Or
where
under
there's going to
what
be
conditions.
that's where there's going to be in the legal in the articles of incorporation, there will be the limits on how people can sell their shares. And then there will be a separate agreement that probably will cover most of
Yeah,
what we need. And I think that the mortgage agreement, in my mind, is basically going to be a guaranteed repayment plan or repurchase plan. You know, basically that's what that agreement is going to say, is that
yeah.
we guarantee that we will buy back your shares over this period of time at this cost. And I think that's really the limit of what the social mortgage agreement will look like. And then all of the other things will be built into the articles of incorporation.
And give us enough time to do that. I mean, typically, I think that it's a year or something to organize that.
Well, in our case, we could make
No.
it 10 years, right? So,
Yeah. But I mean, yeah.
All right, moving on to the next one now. So this is about basically we want to make sure that where people are getting repaid, but they're not making undue profit over the value of the land. And we have a comment from Barbara basically saying, yes, this seems really central and central to what we're talking about. And right, and this is one of those, we've got to figure out how do we make that happen in legal language. But I think this is, yes, I think this is a comment that says yes. So any additional thoughts, Becca?
What is fiat currency?
Dollars as opposed to land value. So it's sort of pegged to inflation, the current value of a dollar.
Yeah, and I think my comment was
We're
probably
in a circle. So
oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you for practicing that. I appreciate it a lot.
I'm just trying to, now that I know what that means, trying to understand this comment. Actual value of the investment is only measured, not Yeah. I don't think I have anything to add. Over to Roland.
Yeah, I have nothing to add either. Over to Heather.
Yeah, and I think what you've done now is answered my question, but I can't read the whole thing. If you can scroll up just a bit. Because we've toyed with this a lot, with the sweat equity, and in the end, people want real money, I think. If they cash out, we need to have the cash to give them the real money rather than
Oh, I
Anyway,
think
I don't know.
you're a comment
It-
ahead.
I'm a comment ahead. Okay,
Yep.
I'm not. I should actually probably go into this myself so that I can scroll up and down and see where I'm at.
Yeah, right now we're just talking about the land value part, and then the next one is
Oh,
this.
okay, okay.
So
Yeah.
next up is sweat
So
equity.
the land value is fine with me.
Cool. All right. So yeah, the next question is about sweat equity. And I've given a very long answer to that. And I'm not sure how much of this gets reflected in the articles of incorporation. I think in terms of the articles of incorporation, what's important is that we need to have the opportunity to do profit sharing. That is something that is not allowed for some legal forms and is allowed for other legal forms. So being able to have a profit sharing structure is kind of the key for this working. And what I have envisioned is that basically we have a way of tracking hours of contribution, and hours of contribution towards the project, any benefits that you're receiving from the projects, thinking specifically about farmers who are living on the property. Basically you're getting a place to live and you're getting food. So that needs to get taken out of the labor investment that you're putting into the project in a fair way. And then if we can have that kind of balance sheet of effort put in versus minus benefits extracted, then we can actually just tally up the financial profit at the end of, if there is one, of the enterprise and distribute it in a fair way based on effort. So that's the idea. I'm not sure how much that gets built into the articles of incorporation, except in terms of profit sharing needs to be something that's acceptable. And again, this could be something that we want to talk through more. So over to you, Becca.
Well, this was where I ran out of time to read the comments, but it sounds like I don't necessarily need to have read that whole comment. I think what you're saying makes sense to me, and I think the rubber meets the road challenge is where somebody stays for a couple of years and then wants to leave and has accrued something and needs to cash out, but there's no cash. So is the sweat equity also, are the people who are putting sweat equity in also bound for the 10-year period somehow? And what would that do to the social relations if somebody is staying because they don't feel like they can afford to leave until the land is sold? That would, but things aren't going well, like I think we need to be careful how we set this up for it to work socially also. Over to Roland.
Yeah, that brings up some interesting things, and it makes me think that more conversation around this, how this would work, would be worthwhile. So I guess the question here is, is this okay? Are we still interested in the idea of sweat equity, and it needs to be worked out so that in terms of the legal structure, it's okay to have it on the document? Or do we feel like the idea of sweat equity doesn't work and we want to remove it? Or do we want to leave it in with the caveat that we need to have discussions with the lawyer? Because I think that I feel like there are ways that we can make it work. I think, Becca, your points are really important to note, because one of the we don't want, we also don't want a structure that's so rigid that it creates conditions that imperil the project. So, for example, if somebody's feeling trapped, anyway. So I think that there's more for me. There's more conversation that could happen around how we would set up the sweat equity, and I feel like it is still a really interesting and useful thing to have in the legal document. So over to Heather.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I'm very interested in kind of working out what would work, because this is something that I've come across many times, and many examples of how it's been problematic as well. So let's try and see if we can't make it work. I had this thought that the opposite of that, the other side of the coin, is that, you know, you work for Giant Mine and you shop at the company store and you do all of this, and in the end it's kind of like, you know, the company benefits but you don't really benefit. And I think when people leave, the whole point of doing all of this for people is that they can build up some kind of if they're not building up some kind of like retirement savings or something, then there needs to be some other mechanism by which they give their time freely when they're of sound body and mind, and they don't have anything in the end that they can can take with them. You know what I mean? I'm not being very articulate, but I do know that there is a danger in not being taken care of as they get older. And I want to work that out with groups. Anyway, I'm willing to pass it on to you, Ben.
I feel like I'm curious to work through this. I don't think it is, and I'm not seeing the challenges. I think I'm not understanding them, because the basically purchasing shares and the equity part of it, they would be bound by the same agreements. And the idea is that the shares are sellable. So you would always be able to sell your shares. And then, I mean, imagine if you're a farmer leaving and there's a farmer coming in, then the farmer coming in, you would find somebody who might be willing to invest. And the whole idea here is that we're taking the land out of the commodified exchange market, and we're creating more of a commons. So when you're buying, let me start by saying sweat equity is a non-negotiable for me, because it's the only way I can work towards having any equity. There's no way at this point in my life that I could come in with funds to secure. And for me, the equity is about securing my tenure on the land. I can't be removed. So that's my number one goal, is that I can't be kicked off of the land. And as a farmer, the only way I can do that is through some sort of sweat equity, where my material contribution is then reflected in legal ownership, some portion of legal ownership. And it is in some ways fungible, because the shares can be sold. So if I wanted to leave, but that's sort of how I earn the share is irrelevant to how the shares then are bought and sold. And I could conceivably sell some of my shares, but not all of my shares, and stay invested in the project. Or I could leave the project and still have my shares there, in backed by the value of the land. So I agree that there's something about, we don't want anyone feeling like they can't leave, but I can't imagine how anybody, because the sweat equity part of the shares is not something that it really is more like if you wanted to retire on the shares. And then, how do you cash out when you want to retire? So I think really the question that we're talking about is, how do we make sure that the shares are sellable in a way that's fair, and that doesn't leave anybody sort of with a sort of imagined money that they need to survive, but they can't actually turn into cash. And I think that comes back to the how shares are sellable part of it, and is somewhat separate from how the shares are earned. Because farmers could also purchase shares through cash, right? And the way that I have this structured, the way I'm envisioning it, you have the option of buying a share. You're not required to buy shares. So you could take your profit sharing as cash and then invest in a retirement fund. Or you could take your profit sharing as shares and feel like that was a better investment for you. So anyhow, I think the takeaway is we need to talk this through. I think it's actually, I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna send it around the circle again. I think we need to talk this through, but I don't think it precludes us moving forward on the legal structure. Because I think really in terms of the legal structure, that's primarily about, we need to make sure that the shares are sellable in a way that's fair. And that's kind of something we've already been talking about. So with that provision, it's an open conversation. It won't preclude us from talking to the lawyers. Over to you, Becca.
Yeah, I think it could take up time with the lawyers, which might be fine because they might have valuable insights here. And again, I think you're right that it comes down to how the shares are sold rather than how they're earned. And I totally 100% on board with sweat equity being one of the ways that happens. And my concern for the two of you and how you're cared for as you age is paramount here. And, what if, God forbid, one of you is injured before the 10 years is up, and, like your desire to protect the land from commodification could be in conflict with your desire, with our collective care for you and the other farmers at some point. And I might be misreading that, but that's my concern. Over to Roland.
Yeah, I think more conversation, and also including the lawyers on this. And I just wanted to say, as a placeholder, that maybe one of the part of the sweat equity, unless it's already there, and if it is, I'm sorry that I don't remember it, but that if there is, for whatever reason, a need for one of the 6 farmers who's accruing sweat equity needs to leave, that then they become, whatever they've earned in terms of sweat equity becomes a social mortgage, and that they get paid back in the same way that social mortgage holders get paid back, or something like that. And I know that that's a whole spaghetti of, there's a whole bunch of things that just branch out from there, and all sorts of questions that brings up. But I just wanted to put that in as a placeholder, as one of the ways in which people could get reimbursed for whatever sweat equity for if they have to leave for whatever reason. over to Heather.
Yeah, I mean, I like this conversation because I'm becoming much more clear how it can happen. And I think there's just a word of caution, this is to me like a more social agreement that could be ratified legally, but not to give it to the lawyers to figure out. It's like, how do we treat each other in community and make sure that we have a community of care going on here that can respond to people's, needs. And we are in our community right now looking at, developing some kind of circle around a community of care. And it's critical on land because you have people who want to stay on the land, but they're not necessarily being farming productive or even necessarily productive in other ways. And yet really they've kind of earned the right to be on the land. So, but I don't think you give a lawyer that. I think we can continue to dialogue on that and bring in other people too as well, like whoever else, and even whether or not people stay on the land forever or until they pass or can't be accommodated. Even if they don't know that, they have a kind of a perspective. Like somebody like Barbara would have a perspective, even if he doesn't join. So I would, yeah. Anyway, I think I've said enough.
Yeah, I think
And sweat equity, I love it. I want to make it work. So I'm with you on that. And I can see it work in the shares now in a different way than I wasn't aware of before. And I think that's actually really good. The other part of it is that the work we do the work we do right now needs to cover us when we can't work. And whether we're on the land or not on the land, we don't need to put people into situations of poverty and expect the government on their, $1,200 to $1,500 a month to be able to take care of people who've given their life to being on a farm.
All right. Yeah, I think in this, it does have connections to a broader, like, what's the village part of this? Because this is actually one of those bigger questions in my mind too, about how can 40 acres support a village? And and we talk about a community of care. Is there what's the material foundation necessary? What's the number of people who are able necessary to support the number of people who aren't able? So that's a kind of a larger question, and we'll get into it. So, but for the legal structure, let's move on. There's a way I can I don't want to resolve that because that's something we talked about needing more. Let's do that. There we go. Yes. So the next comment is just right now, we're not looking for tax exempt status. In the future, we might find some partnership. And in the interest of time, can we get a thumbs up on that? Or do we need any discussion? Okay. And next. Yeah, I think that's probably something that we need. So Barbara's question about we want to make sure that there are limits on the value of the share. We don't want to peg the share to the what do you call it? The book value of the real estate, which is one way of doing it. Which would mean that the shares it would be great for initial investors, but it would be horrible for people coming in later. So, oh, I just lost Heather. Anyhow, that seems to me to be something that we need to discuss, and probably I'm thinking something that the lawyers could help us talk through. I think we're committed to the idea of putting limits on it, but I don't really have any sense of how we would do that. So So anyhow, thoughts on that, Becca? Over to you.
Yeah, I'm distracted by needing to leave for my dentist appointment and figure out how to. I can keep listening on my phone once I just need to switch to Zoom on my phone, but you'll have to read.
Well, and
that.
I feel like we're so close. I want to see if we can bang out a couple of these. I don't want to shortchange but we are kind of at the end of most of the comments. So yeah. And we lost Heather. Oh,
That's me coming in.
okay. I thought maybe it was Heather. All right.
Recording in progress.
Sorry.
And there's Heather. Okay. Right. So any conversation around the or anything to add, Becca, on the limits on the share value?
You were saying we need to talk about it with the lawyer. Is that? Yeah, I agree with that. Over on.
Agreed. Over to Heather.
Agreed.
All righty. And then next up, right, we've already really had that, and this is basically thumbs ups. So we can resolve that. And oh, and the patronage dividend is simply what co-ops are able to do to people who use the co-op. So it's like, you know, you get a cash back at the end of the year for how much and how much you purchase through the co-op. So I'm assuming that's not anything we've ever talked about wanting to do. And so I just wanted to put it in as a specific, we don't really need to do that. Does that work? And Becca understood, I think, as you were suiting up.
Yeah. You assume silence is agreement unless you hear otherwise from me.
Okay. All righty. And oh, right. And this one I think is also a clarification just in the legal language. The income sources that, so Barbara had a question about, or our comment around, we internally may want to limit where our income comes from. We may want to have a values alignment test about where we accept investments or what kind of grants or loans we might be willing to take. The intention here was specifically some legal forms are not allowed to have certain kinds of incomes. So a charity or a nonprofit is not allowed to engage in free market activities. So even for a nonprofit providing educational services, they can't be the kinds of educational services that are offered at the rates they are offered on the open market. They can only be at a reduced rate or for a specific group of people. So that was, I just wanted from in terms of the legal entities side of things, we don't want to have limits placed on how we earn our income. That was the only sort of question there. So is that okay with people? A thumbs up, or is there any need for conversation?
I'm not completely getting it, and maybe I kind of blanked out a bit there.
So this is
the land, I understand the land, and we're talking about activities and ways. And I guess I think I was being kind of blocked a bit when you talked about the kind of the nonprofit. I mean, nonprofits can make as much money as they want.
No, they can't. They can't, and they can't make it in, there are specific limits to how they earn their money. So if a nonprofit were to engage in even like a charity shop, for example, a nonprofit can't run a charity shop. They can't run a charity shop. They have to have the charity shop itself has to provide employment training opportunities for people, or there was other limits that are placed on it.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
It's basically charities and nonprofits are very restricted in how they can earn money. They can't provide services that are available on the open market. It's like that's legally they're not allowed to do that.
I'm not, I think I don't want to hang this up because that isn't my understanding. It's like, and so I think you're talking about some. Okay, let me just think on this a bit. It's like, okay, a charity has a enterprising nonprofit whatever. They can, there's no limit on how much money they make.
There is actually, if a charity has to be very careful, they usually have to set up a separate legal entity to be the enterprising nonprofit. They
Yeah,
have to have
okay.
two legal structures because the
Yeah, okay.
charity
Yeah.
cannot. So that's what I'm saying is we would only be one legal entity. If we were a charity or a nonprofit, we would have to have a separate legal entity. That would
Okay,
be our enterprising
that's
nonprofit.
right. Yeah. And the enterprising nonprofit gives the profits to the charity and all that that relationship is set up. Okay, I understand what you're talking about now.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like when you set up an enterprising nonprofit, it's like, yeah.
That's actually why B Corps. That's one of the reasons why B Corps were established, was that you could do an enterprising nonprofit in one legal company. So yeah, the limits here are really basically this is saying we're probably not going to be a charity or a nonprofit because we want to engage in economic activity.
Okay, but Ben, if we as a charity want to provide services, workshops, services, whatever it is, to the public, we can be competitive with the services that are being provided.
No, that's I read. It was one of the workshops that I went through. They were very, very clear on that. And actually, some charities have gotten into hot water with the CRA.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't provide a market rate service. If you provide a workshop, it has to be for a demographic that is underserved or around an educational topic that is not available in a at market rate service.
There must be lots of the charities that are not in compliance with that, because that is the first time I've ever heard that, actually. And I've worked with charities a lot. And one of the things that too as well is that one of the principles that I've always gone by is, like, let's say with the farmers markets and all that, is that it is not appropriate or moral to undersell the farmers that are there for profit. You give your food away, but you don't go to the market and undersell the farmers.
But see, then that's and those are the kinds of activities where you have to be really careful in how you frame it and what you're doing, because it was really clear in the webinar that I went through. They were really, really clear about that, including things like even when you're providing, if you were providing Excel training, right? Training on doing Excel, you either have to provide it to a particular demographic who has problems accessing the market rate training available, or you have to offer it in a way like for people with visual impairment or people that have some sort of limiting factor. So anyhow, that was one of my big takeaways from that webinar.
There's really good information. I know more like at the farmers market, I'm always saying, no, we're not going to undersell at the market. I mean, that's, and many of us, comply with that. It's kind of like it's not fair.
But I think that, so anyhow, I don't want to get into the details because it could be it's not that you have to undervalue the food, but so for example, you can run a charity shop if a percentage of the people working in the charity shop are doing it for education or for employment training.
Yeah, okay.
Then the activity, or for example, if the volunteers, if that farmers market booth is being staffed by volunteers, if the volunteers are staffing the booth, then you can sell the food at market rate, because it's a limited economic activity. But you couldn't hire people and basically run it as a business, as a charity. You know, anyhow, that was the takeaway that I got from it.
It's okay, Ben. I'm grateful for the new information, and I don't want to hang up this process with it.
And I'll share Roland put a comment in about the link to the webinar, and I can find it and share it.
Okay.
That's where I pulled out most of the comparison stuff between the different the co-op,
Yeah.
CCC, B Corp, was from that webinar. So I'll include the link in the notes that come from this.
And for sure, for growing opportunities when they go to the market, they're charging market rates.
But see, growing opportunities, that's the thing, is that is an outgrowth of the social service that they're providing, right? You know, because the growing opportunities is also about the people with whatever limitations are
for
working.
sure. Okay.
So then that's how that gets wrapped into it. It's, you're only selling the food because it's an outproduct of the other service that you're providing.
Of course, and that's always the case.
Yeah.
So that's always the case. It's just I'm really, really sensitive to going to the market and undercutting people who are trying to make a living, who are having a hard time as it is. And then because we've got all the support and subsidy, we can charge less. Not okay, Ben. Not okay.
Yeah. But no, see, that's what I'm saying. And see, we are not providing a social service in the farming side of it. We are having able-bodied farmers who are farming as a part of their income. And then we can't be a charity and do that.
Right.
Right. So that's
then
the whole
normally
point.
what we do is we separate those two things out, in that that farming end of things, that is like, you're doing a kind of a bit of a hybrid crossover here, and I'm struggling with understanding the holistic of that. You're not separating it. We separate out our nonprofit cooperative from our worker cooperative that can go out there and make money.
Exactly.
I mean, they're not. They also give food away.
Exactly. So
Donate
that's the whole point for the legal structure here. That's the point, is we're trying to create a single legal entity.
Yes. Okay.
And otherwise, so that's why we don't want to place limits on our income sources, which doesn't mean internally, it just means legally, the province doesn't care where we make our income or how where our income comes from. But internally, we can still make choices about, ethical alignment with, where the money comes from.
You got my agreement, consent then.
Okay. And Roland, do you have anything to contribute? Alrighty. And what's up next? Right, that's the same. Right, and we've had this conversation before. One of the clauses that can be included. So community services co-ops, charities, and nonprofits have legal limits on how they dissolve in the end, how they distribute assets at the end of the organization. And there's a continuum. So where there can be greater or lesser limits placed on how those assets are distributed. And we've had the conversation about wanting to be somewhere in the middle. So if we were to be a normal, straightforward company, an incorporated business, then our shareholders could demand that we sell our assets, if we had to dissolve, that we sell our assets to the highest bidder and get as much as we can for it. If we were on the other extreme, if we were a charity, then we could only sell to other charities. And and then basically the market forces would not would be disturbed. So anyhow, what we've talked about is that we want to be somewhere in the middle, where we can put some limits on how, in the event of a very unfortunate having to dissolve the company, which is not the intention, but if we were forced to dissolve the company because we couldn't make it work, we would want to put some limits on how in particular how the real estate was sold, because that's the major asset. And so that's probably, we need some more conversation about what that limit would be, but probably a good conversation to have with the lawyers, because they all know more about what those limits can be. So with that, I'm going to send it around, and actually I just need to take a bio break. I'm at the end of my ability to focus, and this is the last thing for us to talk about.
Why don't we take a bio break right now and come back then, Ben, please?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, and we're back. So yeah, and I feel much calmer about everything. So
I didn't want you rushing to the end.
we were so close to the end too. I was like, I can just hold out a little longer, and then I was like, no, I can't hold out any longer. Anyhow, I think this is definitely one of those. So I think we are agreed. We've had conversations where it seems like we come to an agreement that we want to make sure that we're not just selling to the highest bidder. And I know that, for example, one of the provisions that we could put in would be that we could only sell to people who are going to engage in regenerative agriculture, or, you know, some other limits. There are probably there's limited legal enforceability about that. You know, somebody could say they're going to do something and then do something different, and we wouldn't really have a way, I think, of coming back after them. And there are also, my understanding is, if we chose some forms, there's a question about whether or not some shareholders may disagree with that in the future, and they could actually sue the company in like, for example, if we were a for-profit incorporation and didn't sell to the highest bidder, we would definitely be open to lawsuits from shareholders.
Yeah.
If we were a B Corp and did the same thing, didn't sell to the highest bidder, we would have some legal protection, because it's not in keeping with we could argue that it was not in keeping with the social benefits that are at the core of the company. So I think we're in agreement kind of conceptually, but then figuring out the particulars of what that looks like is something that just has to happen, I think, with the lawyers. So I'm going to skip Becca, unless if Becca chimes in, we'll come back to her, and otherwise let's go over to Roland. Any thoughts or comments? Thumbs up. Okay, over to Heather.
Yeah. I've got comments, but I don't need to enter them now.
Okay. All right. Okay, well then I think that we're largely agreed, and that we know we've got a more conversation around sweat equity and building a caring community, what that looks like. We can move forward on the legal structure, but we want to make sure that the lawyers know that that's one of the things that we want built in, and probably comes in the ability to sell and resell shares. And we probably need to talk through with the lawyers what we can do in terms of limits on the values, limiting the value of the shares, or putting a lock on the distribution of assets in the event of dissolution. And other than that, I think we're good to go.
Wow.
Yeah. it's exciting. And so I'm going to stop share, and we will still, of course, as is our process, everything that we come up with is considered a tentative proposal. We'll make sure that we circulate it, and so people can register objections or concerns. And in the event that we don't hear, then we assume that we're ready to move forward. Any last words for the good of the cause? Final things you need to get out, Roland? Oh, you just muted yourself.
I just muted myself when I meant to unmute myself, which anyway. I would like if you would go. So I wanted to point out that concerns and objections is actually part of the system in sociocracy, and they are very specific and intentional words.
Mhm.
And I'm going to try to define it. And I open the floor also to both Heather and Ben to clarify if I'm not clear enough. Concerns is if if you think that there's something that would be worthwhile mentioning to be considered, that's a concern. A concern is not something that the circle has to act on. It's just a note. An objection is if you think something really is a problem or you completely disagree with, and there is a responsibility that comes with an objection to offer something what's the word I'm looking for, a potential solution or something along those lines.
Mhm.
So you can and I also wanted to say that, and I'm glad, Ben, that you said that this is going to be passed around for other people to be able to comment on. And I would request that that any comments, be they agreements, concerns, or objections, that we keep in mind that this is just a starting place to be able to talk to the lawyers. So if there are so to keep that in mind, and it may make things a lot easier. And to note if there are anything, or if there are things that we want to talk about, so that they are things that are then talked about with the lawyers. So right now, what we're looking for is agreement that we've got a document that is ready to go to the lawyers. And then the conversation continues, but with the expertise of the lawyers involved. So over to Heather.
Yeah, I consent. I just want to comment that I really appreciated the process, and maybe that's the next go around and the closing go around. So just, I consent to the going to the lawyers. Good enough.
Cool. Yeah, I think Roland, you did a good job of framing it. The objections are it's not good enough for now, and it's not safe enough to try. That there is some risk involved in moving forward that would keep us from being effective in what we're doing. And so an objection is similar to a what do you call it in consensus? It's not a veto.
Block.
A block. It's similar to a block. It's slightly different in that there is an expectation that you offer a friendly amendment or a solution that retains the value of the current proposal and addresses whatever the objection is. And the other thing that I think is worth noting is there's also tensions, registering a tension which may not be, usually a concern is, I'm worried that this might happen if we move forward, but I'm not so worried. It's a possibility. It might happen. It might not happen. I'm willing to see. And in that sense, the concerns become sort of sensitizing lenses. So as we move forward, we keep a particular eye out for, is that problem developing? But the other thing that can come up is that basically in this conversation, actually, I think we've got a really good example of the sweat equity conversation is beyond what we're talking about right now, but it's a tension that we need to address. So it goes in the hopper. It gets noted that we've got this other issue. It came up here. It's not relevant to this decision, but it's still worth having on the radar. So we put it in the tension hopper and we come back to it when we can, when it's most useful. So thanks for that process question and comment. So yeah, I think so. We've got it sounds like we're good all the way around on where we are with this conversation and moving forward. So yeah, let's just do a checkout. And really it's just any last thoughts for the good of the cause. Over to you, Roland.
I look forward to the next step. Over to Heather.
Yeah, I appreciate the process enormously because everyone participated in it. We had such a good draft and everybody participated in it. I think it just made it incredibly strong. And my closing comment might be that we're preparing this for the lawyer, but let us not forget that it's the culture of the group that's going to pass on, how we work together
Mhm.
and what our values are and how that gets enacted. It's not the lawyer that's
Mhm.
going to do that.
Yeah.
It's there to protect us in the case that we're going to dissolve, which we're not.
Yeah.
Anyway, pass on to you, Ben.
Yeah, agreed. Totally agreed. And we want to make sure that we don't cause conflicts with ourselves where we put ourselves into a legal bind that makes it impossible for us to enact the culture that we want to, but we still have to make the culture happen. Yeah.
That's the
Good.
hardest part.
Yeah, totally. All righty. Well, thanks everyone. And we'll be posting the video, we'll be sending out notes and onward and upward from there. So we'll see you all later.
Bye.
Bye.